let's welcome
Hey,
Lara.
can you hear me? Uh-oh. Jay, can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh,
Can you not hear us?
the sound got really weird for a second. Will you all talk again?
How about now?
Hi. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I think it's better now.
Okay. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, let us know if for some reason the sound goes out again. Feel free to just jump in. Lara and Jess.
Off we go.
Yeah,
Hi, stranger.
although I feel like we've already been off, you know?
We're on.
Yeah, throughout this week. Hi stranger, hi strangers, all of you.
Strangers in Zoom town. Estrangement.
Yeah. Why don't you leave?
Jess and I come to estrangement, I think, with this mutual shared interest in alterity, dysphoria, euphoria, displacement, otherness. I hope that we get to talk about feeling like a foreigner, a stranger in a strange land, a weirdo in a weird country. There's a lot of valences to estrangement. I come to this maybe through the lens of affect studies in our encounters. I mean, maybe we should just say, to some degree, we meet as strangers, never having met before PNCAs /J, just putting us together.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I think we've tried to cultivate and keep an element of, allowing each other to be strange to each other and ourselves, and hoping to bring that into like the workshop work that we've been doing as well. So that in a way, meeting each other is not trying to immediately know each other. But is to collaborate from a space of vertigo or, like you're on a couch. I'm in an Airbnb.
I'm on a pullout.
I'm in lifts, you're on the street, like, we're kind of moving around, or we're moving around our bodies.
And it's a shared presence in the way of every time I meet you, I'm open to who you might be in this moment, because you are not your bio.
Thank you.
And neither am I,
Yeah,
and neither are
we.
you.
Yeah. I have some stuff to say about estrangement, but I want you to keep talking about it, if that, kind of how you come to it, or how do you wanna go from here?
I wanna hear what you are thinking.
Well, I was just thinking about estrangement in the Lyft ride today, because, I think that, for me, estrangement is very somatic. And I say somatic with a kind of air quote somatic, like a healthy, suspicion about somatics as well, that we've also kind of talked about. So to backtrack, I think that, I align myself in terms of thinking about somatics, with things I've learned from people like Megan, things I've learned from C.A. Conrad, which they think about somatics, not just as like pertaining to what's inside the body, but as a kind of pressing together of the soma, like different herbs and fluids come together and make something new. And so I'm curious about somatics, and I also feel that somatics can sometimes be exclusionary if you don't feel like you have a body that performs in the way that bodies are supposed to perform, and there can be all kinds of reasons for that. And I think most of us actually probably do have those bodies, but we're not encouraged to really feel into them in our everyday lives and in our writing lives. And so I'm always like kind of lugging around this somatic question, I think, and it's often appears as estrangement. And so the Lyft ride experience was like really basic and not offensive in any way, except it just reminded me of what happens when I think I'm in estrangement. Which is, you know, I entered the Lyft ride in a mess, was talking to the Lyft driver, we started talking about cars, and all of a sudden. I was being read and related to in a very cis hetero way, as like a dude who had a wife who, you know, whatever. And what I felt happened at that moment was a certain apparatus or structure appeared between us, and I popped on the other side of it, only kind of inside myself, and my psyche was sort of frantically, to borrow your word from yesterday, frantically trying to find a form, frantically trying to arrange itself around how to respond to the thing that I was now supposed to be being. And totally imperceptible to him, you know, and no offense, like no offense was made by him, but that was like a micro experience of estrangement. There was a kind of somatic estrangement that's also like a psyche estrangement, and I think is also like a kind of textural estrangement.
It's something we share, this
Yeah.
desire to explore the self as transient,
Mm,
as shifting. And that experience you describe is one that I often refer to, you know, as like that crisis of interpolation. I see myself one way and the world is meeting me in another. And it's like for me to experience that distance, and that is estrangement. That can be alienation. People have many names for this. It can also be like jouissance, you know, like
mhm.
that kind of crisis lapse is also a portal into a new way of seeing oneself while also relating to other. And I'm often, yeah, interested in approaching that landscape because it's socially produced. It's often a
Right.
result of just like living in the world as a sentient subject.
And I think that like what I was thinking this morning was like, oh, duh, like as artists and makers and creatives and writers and all the things that we assemble when we come here together, it's like not our job to solve estrangement. Actually what we do is we show up in our estrangement. And we try to put some kind of like language or material to it. And sometimes that is in its most basic units, like the work is not smoothing over the estrangement to then be able to get the work done. The work is, and that's part of the thing. I think we both also talked about presence, showing up with presence in a workshop, showing up with presence with you all, with ourselves. That's part of the like weird, awkward lurch of landing in the present moment, is that landing in the present moment kind of does ask us all to show up into our own flickering estrangements. And then that's where we get to be as like makers and responders. It's really encouraged to leap away from that moment and to try to make something that feels like slick or sellable or sayable or all these other things.
Right. And I think that's where we move into the realm of ugly feelings and strange sensations. Because once you launch into that territory, and I call it a territory because it belongs to no one, and it also seems like the boundaries there are dotted lines as opposed to like bordered. You know, and so sometimes we attach identity or nation or, you know, certain kinds of ideas to mark those borders as a way to translate something that's sayable. But I often feel the appeal of being an artist, or the kind of artist I would like to be, is that ugly feelings and strange sensations poses a challenge as to basically how do you describe the world? How do you describe the world
Yeah.
from that point? And it's very like provocative, like, you know, it's very provocative.
Can I like, I know this is sort of off script, but can I read you to yourself for a second from our correspondence?
Read
past
me.
couple days? Okay. Because to me, this is like a perfect example of a possibility of how to respond. So Lara and I have been doing these 20 lines as a way to kind of experience each other and arrange ourselves toward this. And so this is from, I don't know, yesterday. It was only been a couple days. This morning I awoke feeling estranged from the nerve branches in my arms. They were making a sort of loud sound, but I felt the sound as specific, annoying, impossible combination of what happens when you put the letters B and V next to each other. V, 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 V. Sorry, there was only three V's there. Is the sound of my arms half drowning? The way my immune system interfaces with some of the things I put in my body. V, for example, is and is not a source of pleasure.
It's interesting that your translation of me is V, because my onomatopoeic is. But that's that kind of space that literature and text opens for, like, when you receive a text, like, it is in whose voice?
Yeah.
You know, like, in your internal life as a reader is populated by so many things, and as a writer, when you publish something or share something, this 20 lines exercise was really, this is what I was thinking about this morning. The 20 lines exercise is a spin-off of Harry Matthews, an American Oulipo writer, if that's the way. The American Oulipo writer, that could be contested.
Sure.
An American Oulipo writer who I guess was in the process of writing a novel, struggling with a novel, and challenged himself to do 20 lines a day as a way to, like, manage anxiety around writer's block. And also the death of another writer friend, George Perec. And so the book 20 lines, it's an amazing kind of difficult to classify work, but in that way it feels very much part of the PNCA canon of intergenre, transgenre, interdisciplinary, strange writing.
And the full invitation is 20 lines a day, genius or not.
Juniors or not,
Yeah,
just show up
yeah.
with 20 lines. So yeah, departing into that 20 lines, I was thinking, this is very vulnerable for me because I come from a background of writing in which is performance-based and publication-based. So I'm very used to the outward facing. No one sees it unless it's an editor. No one sees it out in that sort of generative slime space that we kind of talked about and was introduced yesterday during Megan and Emily's talk. Like, the slime space is very like my own. 20 lines a day and doing it with just like inviting the stranger in changes how I, all of a sudden it's not a performance because it's not exactly public, but it is open now to someone new. So the free writes, these 20 lines that I was doing were like a source of anxiety, but also a source of pleasure.
I think you put your finger on something too, which is, that we were just talking about how do you do 20 lines or something like that, and I'm not sure that Harry Matthews did it this way, but I have found that 20 lines in conversation with somebody else or with a group of people, does keep a door open, always, for something new to come in, and that some new thing might be yourself meeting that space, but it might also be something that gets tugged or tagged by the other person who you don't know what they're going through or doing, you don't maybe even know them at all, often it's great to do it with a total stranger. But something is let live, something is left, there's an escape hatch and there's a place to like pour yourself into.
I would love to hear some of your 20 lines.
Some of my 20, like from what we've been doing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be sheepish to select which of your 20
Oh.
to share.
I think like not even selecting really, just, I mean, it's sort of like. It's all the same, like, you know what I mean?
So Jess also read a different, if you remember, and we're at the reading last night,
Yeah.
Jess read 20 lines from a different correspondence and a different moment in time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't feel like, I feel like they're all the same, not because they all say the same thing, but just because they're all a mix of like motley. Presence and not presence, getting it right and not quite getting it right, but feeling like, let's go on anyway,
20 lines becomes a form.
Yeah,
It's like the hundreds.
Yeah.
By
Yeah,
Lauren
yeah.
Verlant and
sure,
forget the other writer, but
Kental Bears,
yeah.
well, we were gonna read we were like, yeah, so I'll read in like one and you wanna read one and then, yeah, okay. But now you're making me think I should pick, I was just gonna like start at the start and,
Be random.
okay. Okay, now I don't even know how to pronounce this word, that I started it with, anthol. That was like the sentence notes. Anthol seems like a threshold of sorts, threshold. I went straight from the opening gathering meeting to the grocery store where I drifted around in the beer, frozen, and candle aisles. When I say straight to, I really mean home to lethargic, sick on couch kid reading about robots who have rewilded, or one in particular, Roz. Roz is mom to Bright-Billed Goose. I have been doing 20 lines a day with for 1.5 years, my friend poet BB, and so did last night 40 lines, but my tap, never what you would call full, might splutter. The lines kind of have to be fresh, can't be imported, I'm learning. The oven isn't preheated yet, but I put the frozen pizza in on a popped out pan. I'm testy and uncertain about life choices and not being patient enough. Everyone is asleep, but the dishwasher, another thing we don't have on the island that I'm probably overusing. Part of what I like about the idea of estrangement is from extraneous, foreign from without, which somehow engages points at the surface skin barrier. I'm often either too without or too within. When I was in Moscow, the silos captivated me. Moscow, Idaho. I told a student, write silos, it's also a form. As I said it, I knew I was being too giving. Rather than retract, I doubled down. This is the part of the problem with the extraneous. My within, without is disturbed. Most recently in rest stop bathrooms in the Scablands, where I thought I might be something just for breathing, or the way my toes pointed around the toilet bowl. It's always about wrong reflection, but these kinds of bathrooms have scratched metal rectangles instead of mirrors.
In reading and receiving these, I felt like I was reverberating alongside a kind of microcosm of concerns that are shared, are social. They're intimate in that they reveal, because I'm like new to you and new to you every time I receive something from you. I have a glimpse into your inner world, and also like your experience of the social world, the conditions of the social world that interface with anxiety, worry, glee. And it was very generative for me to like receive it. And as a writer, it's a kind of like that surprise of like, oh, what will reading this very present, sporadic text allow me to open up in the way of like my own sporadic thinking. And it's that stranger energy, a word that came to me when I arrived today was stranger danger. Like stranger danger, it can be exhilarating to the degree of that little bit of adrenaline surge that allows you to sort of think on your feet. It's the high that maybe some people get doing improv, more like that kind of work. And those conditions for some people are very generative. So that was like, like your experience of your own work is, I hope when I share mine, it changes the inflection and the color.
Sure.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's worth saying that part of the practice is to not start to feel like too much care towards responding to what you've received. Like your care is just in opening your correspondence or something like that, and bringing yourself in its motleyiness to the moment. But it's once we start to perform like I am Jess responding to you,
Right.
then it's a whole other bunch of stuff crowded about how we're received in the world, what we think the other person expects of us,
Right.
how we want to sound, how we want to be. And the thing that I think that, and I at some point want to talk a little bit about people who are working with me last semester. Know I've been obsessed with Linda Berry recently as someone to help, but that really fragile thing that we're trying to access and get towards and also protect can get so quickly washed away by our sense of how we're supposed to be and who we are and the stories we've told ourselves about each other. And so anything that we can do to kind of stay in that other moment, it's really great. Read something.
Okay. Read something, yeah. I feel like, to your point, it's hard because to let go of the internalized editor in me that's always fixated on like, is this usable? Can this be brought to bear as publication? It's really hard for me, to live with writing that's this raw. I am really not used to sharing it. I can tell I'm experiencing some version of performance anxiety having agreed to do this. Some months ago, S had asked me if I wanted to write a book together. I thought it unlikely that she would self-actualize enough to do this with me. But I said yes, because I wanted to see who we would become in writing if we wrote alongside one another in this devoted kind of way. S got an MFA in fiction, but self-identifies as a poet. Having never mutually embarked on that book we speculated on, which I imagined as a kind of extension of a years-long dialogue, somewhat in the vein of Lynn Haginian and Leslie Scalapino's posthumously published Hearing, I enter into this moment, this exchange already with some sense of treason, anticipating someone else's possessiveness. S is possessive, but so am I. Because I think, what if you and I did this forever? Gonna skip a bit. I'm a bit of a cliche and a liar when I say, but right now is the richest I've ever been. I have an antagonistic feeling towards money. Never having really had it, how much is enough, really? It's hard for me to imagine doing anything meaningful with it besides spending it. For New Year's, I buy canned lobster, cake, and white sturgeon caviar. I feel embarrassed by my desire to live momentarily as if this is all within my means. It isn't. It was the first time in my life I ever had caviar. I'm somewhere between 35 and 36 years old. I ask E if he's ever had caviar before, and he says yes, but he can't remember the occasion or the feeling. I find this sad, and I wonder how many more times I will ever eat caviar again in my life. Earlier in the day, New Year's Eve, I was chopping basil. The basil was less fresh than it was. The only reason I'm writing right now is because M said they were and would first. And I thought, what else is there really for me to do? The internet says the smell of old basil can produce different scents akin to cat urine, lemon, licorice, or even cinnamon due to the presence of particular compounds like mercaptan, anethol, citral, cinnamate. In the interest of learning new words, I look up the word anethol, a colorless hydrophobic aromatic compound. So that's the kind of precedes, what you shared.
And wraps around it, like, part of what I felt like listening to that, was the generosity of being in somebody else's, like, kind of wild mind. That, in a strange way, reminds you of yourself, because it's so supple, like, it's supple in a way that we don't allow ourselves to be very much, and so hearing somebody kind of drop into and spread out, and allow, I think can feel like it actually can deepen a relationship to our own, writing sense and what we have the possibility to be. And also just sort of in a sort of a practical way, I think we've been trying to talk about or edge towards in our workshop, like, how do you follow the trail that's the unexpected trail? It might seem like the random trail, like the chopped basil that then goes to the old basil, that then goes to the cat urine. What happens is that the 20 lines that I had sent to you before were talking about how my Airbnb smelled like cat pee, and it was driving me crazy. And so, like, there's a way that this stuff is vibrating with itself and each other, in ways that we can't totally predict, but like are textured in there. And it takes you to a place that you didn't know you were going. And then that becomes kind of the essential place. But how do you get there? Like, and you can't, there's no shortcut to there, right? Like, you have to be willing to wild out and be a little awkward and not know and think this isn't a cool line. Or, I mean, all your lines are cool, but like, like, why am I talking about this? Why do I care about this? It's like the word that has come up to me and thinking around estrangement recently is like cultivation. And I'm not like, I live on a farm and we garden and we farm and stuff like that. And we prune our trees and things. But at the same time, like, when things are over pruned, there's no tendrils that reach out and touch other things unexpectedly that we can then follow. And so how do we notice these things, these habits, these places our mind might want to wander without immediately pruning it back, such that we can't get to the thing that it might be going towards?
This is reminding me of an anecdote about Clarice Lispector, which I know we both love her work, and how her translations have been re-released, like new translations of her work have been re-released in English, but she was originally writing in Portuguese. And in the preface to one of the new translations, someone had said the reason to do these new translations of Clarice Lispector is because it felt like the original translations, maybe, 20 years ago, had clipped the thorns off the rose.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of
Yeah.
around this, because
Yeah.
also I think it was Benjamin Moser, and he said
Mhm.
also. You think that her, that the translation is part of what makes the experience of being in her work so wild feeling and so strange and so fresh and so new, but actually, when you read it in the Portuguese. It's so spiny and strange, and the work of the translator is to protect that. And re-represent it.
Yeah, capture the style of it, and yeah, something of those first round of English translations had made something in Clarice's work that I'm glad, there are many people who are like, that deserves to be done over again.
Mhm.
And, I'm thinking like one of Clarice's novels, for instance, begins with a comma. No word, no comma, it begins with a comma, and that, she has short stories that like drop off a cliff, end abruptly. It's not even that there's no closure or like that the ending that's provided resists closure, it's that like. That's it, it just drops off. And it's a story that, is about, I think, remembering a suicide. So there's something around, that pleasure and the kind of trust in allowing a sort of wildness to take over, but it comes from a sort of, I think it has something to do with belief systems. I kind of want to shoot a question to you because, since we're in this sort of teaching context, and it's something I ask myself a lot. How do you embrace disorientation, wildness, without getting lost, overwhelmed? Like, you let the garden grow,
Mhm.
it's the feralness, like, but how do you then make, what then?
Well, that's such a good question, and I think it's a little. Well, I haven't really understood in that word orientation and disorientation, and thinking about Sarah Ahmed and like, queer phenomenology and, I had a quote that I just wanted to share from the intro to this book, which is really beautiful. She says she comes to like orientation by way of sexual orientation and starting to wonder about it, and what are we doing when we're orientating ourselves? So she says like becoming reoriented, which involves the disorientation of encountering the world differently, made me wonder about orientation and how much feeling at home or knowing which way we are facing is about the making of worlds. Disorientation is a way of describing the feelings that gather when we lose our sense of who it is that we are. Such losses can be converted into the joy of a future that has been opened up.
Such losses can be converted.
Yeah.
And I think to me, like the loss is like the starting place. Like, it's like I already, like, I just feel like I arrive, and maybe I could tell a lot of stories about why, but it can also just be like, my human print or something. I feel like I arrive feeling on the outside of. And feeling so dematerialized that it's like hard to like cohere to even be in a room or something, it's like, am I here? Like, like it's like not like, so it's not like, even though as I've been describing it, I'm saying like find like the weird root that reaches out and like go towards it. I think that my own experience is sort of more like weird roots everywhere and like how to make something out of them. And so it has been a long road to understand that art and art practice and writing can be a place, almost therapeutically to land or something like that, to find a self that coheres on the page even for a minute. To like, why I wanted us to read like that little bit of your 20 lines, and I think you do it all over your 20 lines, but this morning I awoke feeling estranged from the nerve branches in my arms. They were making a sort of loud sound. Like they were making a sort of loud sound. So perfectly says the thing, without like a lot of care about like poetics. I guess you could argue that it is a poetics or something like that to do that, but like it so says the thing that there's, I think, a huge burst of energy and a release to just hear something be described in its like minutia and in its physical experience. and in its kind of 3D-ness. And so to me, I think the experience of walking through the world feels really chaotic all the time. And sometimes once in a while, if I let myself and don't like do everything else but write, if I let myself land on a page, especially when I'm feeling real grief or real like chaos or something like that, the page can be a place where just writing something that describes the experience of feeling dematerialized can offer like a little bit of refuge from that.
Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you in this. The complexities are brought to bear in teaching in the way of how do you teach someone how to get lost? That's, that's tough.
And there are actual like, writing practices like, from like, kind of, Harry Matthews and others who are like, or wanderers, walkers, like let's move around the world. What is it like to be like involved in your writing practice, turn the wrong way? Like go out your door and go the other way. And like what slight shift, because it's like these barely perceptible shifts that allow mega openings.
Yeah, yes, like put a hole in it. You said
Yeah,
it
put a
could
hole in
be
it,
a
yeah.
paradigm shift
Yeah,
in a short
totally.
story that's sort of stalled out and needs creative new energy. I know that I've had moments, I experienced, it doesn't matter how many years you've been writing. You can encounter a problem where you are bored with your own work. Maybe if you've been writing and publishing longer, the likelihood is more possible,
Yeah.
having, read your work many times in front of many audiences, that you'd be bored with your own work. Like, I took a real joy yesterday in reading new material, and this morning I got to reflect, oh, it was great reading something that isn't embedded in grief. And I kind of had overlooked that many of my years as a writer and reader, those earlier experiences were just based in a grieving and then a public grieving that happens in the sharing of that work. And so now I'm at a moment, 10 years into a career, whatever that means, of looking for new narrators and selves that have like seeing people who are in a mode of estrangement. I've been on this kind of scavenger hunt for narrators that I'm like, oh, like characters. Kind of in the way of looking for consciousness in the form of text, a voice, looking for a voice that captures something I'm interested in exploring and trying on for size, beyond or alongside grief. Somebody whose work I've been returning to is Eileen Miles. Eileen Miles was was probably the first like real writer I ever met who I said, I am a poet. They said, are you a poet? And we were like on a subway platform. And I looked at my boyfriend who was a poet and I said, yes. And so when I read Eileen's prose, I have a lot of like feeling and thought about the narrators that they create. This is from a fun one I got at Powell's, Bread and Water. It's been reissued. It's a baby. She's so cute. So cute. Thing is, I want to go neither outside nor inside tonight, talk about how I feel or all that. Today I was thinking that though I felt pretty fried from last night and making everyone who saw me suspicious, I still felt good in my body and frisky. I liked my ideas. I was watching things as they go. I thought it would keep being that way, but here it is night and everything's different. I just started doing this thing between remembering and imagining. Last night, I'm taking what happened and unspooling each look into a conversation, or really playing each conversation as they really were. That peripatetic sense of wandering that I hear in Eileen's narrators is it was like very inspiring to me, because it's a kind of like situationist practice of like, okay, so how do you get lost? Well, like go on a walk down a street you've never been, be an urban explorer, and then try and listen to instead of like looking at the storefronts, though that can be a practice, attend to the voice that's narrating the journey. Just like it's like a radio, like tune in to the way that person talks. Because the way that person talks when you're walking and like being animated by the city sounds, that's going to infuse and feed in a way that's very different than when you're like sitting down to, right? And having an ability to tune in and listen to that frequency and then recognize it as kind of connected to that movement of walking you know. It can be a source of real pleasure and estrangement, like,
Mm.
oh, the texture of my consciousness, to introduce that. From Jan Alejandro's talk, is different when I'm moving around in a city or in a rural and whatever. So that's a means of kind of getting lost that I think about, in which you can hear something maybe you hadn't heard before.
I love that book and I love it for those reasons, like the feeling of, and Haley, you and I have talked about this a bunch, of not asking for permission to be the body that's moving around in the world. And what does that experience feel like on the page to read? And what's it like to offer that to ourselves when we're writing? So it's not like Eileen doesn't also have like things that they worry about, or qualms or stuff or preoccupations that come up in the text, but there's not a like kind of securing, are we okay? Are we okay? Now I'm gonna tell you why I'm gonna make this turn. Now I'm gonna tell you why I went over and talked to that person and justify it or something like that. But instead, it's just a mind alighting freshly in a place and saying something about the experience of being there, whatever that is.
People get pissy
Yeah.
about that narrator. But I'm in search of narrators, like another, what you're saying is making me think of what a painter, who's also a novelist, told me, is that a lot of fiction writers try to be smarter than their reader and their characters, and they spend their novels and fiction trying to prove how smart they are. But that's a problem that's a creative problem, because you have to be as unknowing as your characters to create something of that present sense of like moving through the world. And I think he's right, like there's something to, if you want to create a sense of aliveness for the reader, you've got to create it and build it into the process of writing and drafting. And you can always add form, structure later. You can always add narrative, you can always add sequence later. Like our brains are, I feel like, are hitched to producing sequence and narrative and making meaning in that teleological way. So to lead from the gate with that, that might be unnecessary and rob you of an opportunity to be like a little bit more free.
Can I read some
Read me some cookie.
Cookie on that? Like, we've been in search of Cookie. I've been in search of Cookie. I had this book, I lost this book, I lent this book. I want to read us all this story. It's a page. And then you found the book, but it was a Hanuman edition at Powell's, which I missed. So, but it is like about, it's kind of about that movement, and it's about kicking away from trying to prove an intelligence, and it's allowing oneself to arrive at maybe something you always knew but didn't have language for, but perhaps also an unexpected destination in self through the course of the writing. So it's called Alien 1965. I was always leaving. Every time I left, I had a different hair color, and I would be standing on the porch saying goodbye to the older couple in the living room. I didn't have anything in common with them, except that we shared a few inherited chromosomes, the identical last name and the same bathroom. They would be protesting, screaming. It became a tune with the same refrain and the same lyrics. If you leave now, you'll have no future. If you leave now, you'll be a bum. I'll be back in the fall when school starts, or I'll be back after the weekend. If you leave now, don't dare come back. How are you going to live? You don't have any money. Why do you have to leave? It's natural. It's a biological urge, like little birds testing their wings. I can't help myself. There were a bunch of people waiting for me in the street in front of the house, honking the horn of a cream T-bird or a black Impala convertible or a pale blue Rambler. Bye, I'll see you soon. Do you want some money? No, thanks, bye. Anyway, bye. We sped off. I told my friends in the car that I was an alien to my parents. It was better that I didn't hang around there too much. At this point, it would always dawn on me that there was another problem. Not only was I an alien to my parents, but I was an alien to my friends. So, I just love it. And I love the many things that kind of come in that last paragraph, but like, even just the idea of saying, but there was another problem. Oh, we've been trying to solve a problem. Were we trying to solve a problem? I thought we were just like watching you fight with your parents, and then breaking the binary of like, oh, I'm against my parents must mean I'm with my friends. Like, what is it like to be to to one's alterity, one's alienness, one's estrangement continues to tunnel. And allowing it to continue to tunnel. What is it like to say, like, yeah, I'm an alien to my friends, like, and how is that, like, maybe like one of the essential things about making like work, you know, is to be able to push off from it, pushing off from expectation isn't just pushing off from the expectation of the older generation who made you or something like that, creatively or like paternally, but it's also pushing off from the expectation of our peers and of the pressures that come up against us. And not because she's like, I hate my friends, it's just like, what it's like to be really unknown. It's scary.
It is. Oftentimes I complain about how lyric poetry is, at least in the US and in English, literary forms, really heralded as a kind of virtue, place of virtue to arrive as a writer. And so experimental forms, intergenre, transgenre forms, genre writing like horror, YA, romance, like these things get consigned to kind of secondary or lesser status. And this is just an effective whiteness on class. So it's, but at the same time, I've this kind of like, I think I come to lyric poetry with a kind of like anger, you know, like, but also like I love lyric poetry. And so having to square something of like, I love the potential of lyric poetry, but also thinking about disorientation as a kind of place to, you know, like narrative is a place where I feel like it can be very rich to kind of veer off. But in a poem, it's tricky. It feels like you know, it's built on the veering off, but also trying to deviate in a form that becomes so known to us, like the lyric, has made me want to find lyric poetry that like makes me feel uneasy, very uneasy. So I'll read a poem by Sarah Nicholson of Minor Landscapes. I posted this on my Instagram, but I keep returning to it because it creates an opening for the instability of language for those of us maybe working in less narrative forms. Of Minor Landscapes, the hypothesis that beauty is nothing but what occurs at night. I'm willing to take my leave of it. I sleep and sleep. And when I look up, I notice how fucked up it is here. Snow positioned in a circumflex, green honey over a violet sea. The animals are clear, the music lacerates them. The field in translation tends to die, just as numbers die. He who brought zero into the elegy never knew grief. I never knew the words for snow, honey, sea. It's a short poem. It's not afraid to use that word sea twice. And to import or honey, right? To import this kind of imagery, green honey over a violet sea. Like that translation of experience is very meaningful to me. And so the potential of narrative and lyric to create opportunities to encounter that otherness or sense of a foreigner in one's home language or whatever, like is so appealing.
It makes me think of the kind of Jose Esteban Munoz's like disidentification and like kind of working with and against something. So it's like bringing up the honey, bringing up the sea, but also tapping it another way. And it also makes me think of in Eileen's awesome book, Pathetic Literature, the anthology that maybe some of you have seen, but it's a tome. And in their intro essay, they're trying to like define what pathetic is and going back towards the idea of like a more earlier valence of pathetic is about feeling, pathos. But like sort of identifying that like it's Americanness that made pathetic really like the deflated thing it is. But saying like if pathetic is about feeling and also holds deflation in it somewhere or a failedness, they're identifying like what all holds this together in the anthology and saying that it's people who are willing to make work that see a limit whatever the limit is, and then just go a little bit past it. And to me, that poem is like seeing the limit, showing the limit, and then finding a way past it or around it, or to puncture it, or to make new space, right?
Right. So much in line with that, those lines you read from, this one.
Sarah Ahmed.
Yeah.
You know, we have like not that much time, and we wanted to do a little bit of like writing with you all if you want to. Or drawing, and I just wanted to like really quickly, before we get into that, I'm gonna share a tiny bit of Franny Choi's Soft Science. Cyborg poems, but this is a book that I just, like, I can't say enough, like, I knew about her a long time ago. She's a comic book artist, she's a writer, she's a teacher, she's just like, kind of a radical thinker. And this book is awesome, and I've been trying to make everybody read it, because it is in all kinds of ways trying to access something that's really hard to talk about, which is like, what are we doing when we're making art? What are we doing when we're making work? And she fixes on this idea of the image, and the image is not visual for her. The image is not kind of a live thing, that is inside us, that somehow we transfer to somebody else via poem, story, narrative, song, sculpture, like whatever it is, play. And so I just wanted to say, to share a tiny bit, and this is what this page looks like, okay? And all of these pages are completely covered. She's really into trying to get adults to draw. I believe there was, wait, this is the wrong page. So, yeah, I'm gonna read this anyway. I believe there was another world that would show itself to me in the smallest ways. The gray kitten in the picture by my bed would accidentally blink his eyes. The girl in the picture would breathe. I believe there was another world, but I only noticed it when it became harder to get there. There had been a time when a toy elephant was as alive as a real rabbit in the grass. I didn't know there were different kinds of alivenesses, and two worlds contained by each other. Something can only become an illusion after disillusionment. Before that, it is something real. What caused the disillusionment? No one told me the print on the wall was just ink and paper and had no life of its own. At some point, the cat stopped blinking and I stopped thinking it could. But my memory of the blinking cat is still vivid nearly 50 years later. Why? Why would an image of something that never happened travel with me for all of these years? And then she says, like, what is an image, right? An image at the center of everything we call the arts and children call play is something which seems somehow alive. It's not alive in the way you and I are alive, but it's certainly not dead. It's alive in the way our memory is alive in the way the ocean is alive and able to transport us and contain us. Alive in the way thinking is not, but experiencing is, made both of memory and imagination. This is the thing we mean by an image. And then it's like this, right? And she says, look, images are found in action, by and through, between inside and outside. Like that's where the image is, between inside and outside. So what we have inside somehow has to come outside, and what's outside somehow has to come inside. And there's like kind of patrolling, and there's a structure, and sometimes that can be dangerous, and sometimes that can be violent, but it's also something that we always are navigating as artists, right? As makers, and also just as humans. And so container is really up, I think. The surface is really up. And part of estrangement is feeling outside of, right? But outside of is also produces an inside, you know, and so we're always navigating this. And so we're gonna just take 5 minutes and just kind of feel into like some of the things that we've talked about. One of the potential offerings to do is to try another, and one way I think we can feel our outsideness and insideness of containers is to change medium, right? To texturally meet an outside and an inside. So what if you try to draw your estrangement? Your sense of estrangement, how you feel about estrangement right now? What if you try to draw it or visually represent it? So we're outside of language.
Embrace the nonverbal.
Yeah, embrace the nonverbal. That's one option, okay? And the other option is from this really beautiful book by poet Franny Choi called Soft Science, where she takes Alan Turing's Turing tests, right? The questions about how to tell if you're like a computer or not. and then has a sort of cyborgian like identity, alt identity, try to answer them. And it's really, and I'll post like a interview with her. It's really interesting to hear why she tries to do this. But here's just an example, and then we're gonna give you a chance. You could also choose to answer this question in your own way with language that tries to engage estrangement. So it says Turing test. This is a test to determine if you have consciousness. Do you understand what I am saying? That's one of the questions. And then the response is, and it looks like this. So it's like kind of a chunk. In a bright room on a bright screen, I watched every mouth, duck, duck, roll. I learned to speak from puppets and smoke, orange worms twisted into the army's alphabet. I caught the letters as they fell from my mother's lips.
Sodium bicarbonate, no, whirlpool, whirlpool, sword, wolf. I circled countable nouns in my father's papers. Sodium bicarbonate, NBC, N1, hippocampus. We stayed up practicing girl, girl, girl until our gums softened. Yes, I can speak your language. I broke that horse myself.
So 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Either answer this question, do you understand what I am saying?
Or draw the shape of your estrangement.
Timekeeping.
Oh, yeah, so right there. We can skip this. It's fascinating.
Okay. It's in your narrative. Research your narrative. Okay. That's good. Yeah.
These are all good.
So it's on YouTube. Awesome. There's a, but there's a couple questions in the chat. One is why 20 lives? That was right. The second one, Linda, questions asks, can you also add wildness and freedom? That was the question, and then it looks like the most recent question is.
What was the reason given for changing? Right. What was the reason for changing? What was the reason given for changing media? Is it to break something? What is our question?
In about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You can just, we don't have to answer the questions, but I just wanted to throw them out there.
Okay. We might stop the questions on that. Give
Yeah.
people time to shoot. Okay, who wanna arrive on back? I think we thought we'd close with the share, if people feel inclined. Do you wanna add to that?
No,
Curious about people who drew some things. If you feel like sharing.
I do something, I don't know, just like, do you want me to pass it around or?
just hold it
Or you
up.
can hold it up.
Just talk about it.
Well, I don't know how to talk about it.
Could be presented with or without commentary.
Okay, cool, let me
Thank
just
you.
look at it then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Something you drew?
I guess I've got, I don't know how well you can see it because I did it in pencil, but like,
Yes.
it's a lot of like body parts. At one point I tried to draw intestines and it didn't work out very well. And yeah,
Thank
a
you.
lot of body estrangement about body is kind of what I've been talking about, thinking about primarily.
There was a question in the chat, I just wanted to introduce why transition medium?
Do you wanna say something?
Or if others have thoughts, why transition, why go to the nonverbal or drawing? Or did you notice something in the switch to suspending words?
I actually feel like switching out of, like, I did write words on this, I'm not gonna lie, but like, kind of, for the most part, abandoning words feels like it gives a more visceral impact sometimes and puts visuals to things that I maybe don't yet have the language to convey, other than like, I know I feel it, I just don't know how to say it. That makes sense?
Thank you, yes. Anybody else want to add to it?
I drew, and I think I drew like it's like a self-portrait, right? And it's really small, and there's like a big, huge glass of liquid, and then a person that's me, or like an animal that's me, I don't know. But like, I feel more comfortable writing, and so I feel more filtered, I think, writing words. Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's really helpful, yeah.
Can I say something? I feel I take really bad Polaroids and getting me, into the camera and not of people. But getting beyond language, cause sometimes for me, language is so direct a material that, it can, fix me in ways that I don't wanna, like,
Yeah.
to keep that estrangement
Yeah.
alive. Getting beyond language, feels liberating. You know, it like, it's a sort of like welcome opacity. Like language can be so clarifying in ways, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Playing in that playground can allow you to be in the space of blur, affect, mood, inchoate. Enjoy estrangement, and thanks everyone for your attention.
Yeah, so great. Thank you. Yeah.
So great, thank you all. Okay, cohort 24S, the Fab Five, we're having a quick 10-15 meeting in this room, so people, I mean, yeah, people